There is a document that appeared on the Senate Legislative Council website at 11:47 p.m. last night. It stayed online for exactly 9 minutes before being pulled. But in those 9 minutes, 3 congressional researchers downloaded it. And what is inside that document explains why, at this very moment, the United States government is operating without a functional chain of command. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not talking about cable news hysteria. I am not talking about partisan bickering or the usual theater of American politics. I am talking about a documented procedural constitutional crisis that is unfolding in real time, right now, while the rest of the world is sleeping. Before I tell you what is in that document, you need to understand 3 distinct events that happened in the last 18 hours. The media is reporting them as separate stories. They are not separate. They are the same story. First, Wednesday morning, 06 DAOS Washington time. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff convened an emergency meeting at the Pentagon. This was not on the public schedule. This was not announced to the press bureau, but 3 defense officials have confirmed the meeting happened, and they confirmed the specific phrase that was used to convene it: continuity of government protocols. You need to understand what that phrase means. Continuity of government, or COG, is the doomsday mechanism. It is the constitutional machinery designed to preserve governmental function during catastrophic events: nuclear war, massive terrorist attacks, the decapitation of the executive branch. The last time this specific phrase was invoked operationally was the morning of September 11th, 2001. It is not used for policy disputes. It is not used for routine briefings. When the military leadership requests a review of COG protocols, they are preparing for a scenario where the normal chain of command collapses or becomes illegitimate. That meeting happened at 6:00 a.m. 3.5 hours later, 9:30 a.m. The U.S. bond market opens. Treasury yields spiked immediately. Now, for most people, bond yields are abstract financial noise. But for institutional investors, for the people who actually run the world's economy, the bond market is the only truth detector that matters. And Wednesday morning, something unprecedented happened. Goldman Sachs circulated an internal memo to its major institutional clients. The memo was leaked within hours. It contained one phrase that made every seasoned trader on Wall Street freeze: institutional risk assessment elevated to Category 4. Category 4 is the highest designation Goldman Sachs uses. It is reserved for 2 scenarios: war or coup. Not a recession, not a government shutdown. War or coup. That memo circulated at 9:30 a.m. 4.5 hours after that, 2 p.m., Senate Majority Leadership invoked an obscure parliamentary procedure buried in Senate Rule 22. This rule allows the Senate, under specific emergency conditions, to fast-track legislation without a presidential signature. The modification was filed quietly, no press release, no grand speech on the Senate floor, just a procedural notation in the congressional record. But what it does is critical. It creates a pathway for Congress to act unilaterally if the executive branch becomes unresponsive or dangerous. 3 separate branches, 3 separate actions, all within 8 hours, all preparing for the same scenario: a president who cannot or will not be controlled by constitutional limits. Now, let me tell you what that 9-minute document actually said. The official title is Memorandum on Presidential Authority Limitations During National Security Emergencies. It was drafted by the Office of Senate Legal Counsel. This is a nonpartisan office. These are the constitutional mechanics, the lawyers whose job is to advise the Senate on the legal boundaries of power. The memo is divided into 4 sections. Section A is titled Constitutional Authority Analysis. This is where it gets technical, but stay with me because the technicality is the weapon. The memo breaks down Article 1 versus Article 2 powers. Article 1 grants legislative authority to Congress. Article 2 grants executive authority to the president. But here's the question the memo addresses: when those 2 articles conflict, which one wins? The memo cites historical precedent going back 72 years. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer, 1952. This case is the holy grail of executive power limitation. In 1952, President Harry Truman tried to seize steel mills during the Korean War. His argument was national security. The country needed steel for the war effort. The workers were striking. Truman issued an executive order taking control of the mills. The Supreme Court said no, even in wartime, even for national security, even with noble intentions. The president cannot act beyond constitutional authority. Congress controls commerce. Congress controls domestic policy. The president cannot simply declare an emergency and override that authority. That ruling has governed executive power for 7 decades. Every president since Truman has operated within those boundaries. This memo cites Youngstown as the precedent for the Senate to override presidential emergency declarations. Not advise, not consult, override. Section B addresses emergency powers curtailment. The specific language states, the Senate retains authority to nullify emergency declarations by simple majority vote. This directly contradicts the National Emergencies Act of 1976, which grants presidents broad discretion. So you have competing legal frameworks. Which law supersedes? The memo argues that congressional authority under Article 1 cannot be permanently delegated away. Even if Congress passed a law giving presidents emergency powers, Congress retains the constitutional right to reclaim that authority at any time. But Section C is what caused the panic. Page 7, paragraph 4. I am going to read you the exact language. In circumstances where executive actions threaten constitutional order, Congress possesses inherent authority to temporarily suspend military command transfer pending judicial review. Read that again. Suspend military command transfer. The Senate Legal Counsel is preparing a legal framework to remove the president's command of the armed forces. This is not hypothetical. This is not academic legal theory. This is an operational memo providing constitutional justification for Congress to take control of the military away from the commander-in-chief. That paragraph is why the White House forced the document offline. But here is what nobody noticed in Section D. Section D contains a list, 14 names, all Foreign Service officers from the State Department Office of Legal Advisor. These are not political appointees. These are career professionals who interpret international law for the United States government. They have served under Republican and Democratic administrations. Some have been in their positions for 20 years. On Wednesday, all 14 submitted resignation letters simultaneously. The Office of Legal Advisor does not resign en masse. These are people who stay through transitions, through controversies, through partisan fights. Their job is to provide legal guidance regardless of who occupies the White House. When they resign together, they are sending a message. We cannot provide legal cover for what is coming. The State Department exodus was not the only bureaucratic revolt. At the Pentagon, Joint Staff lawyers circulated internal guidance Wednesday afternoon. The subject line read, "Distinguishing lawful from unlawful orders." This is a document that exists in military legal training. Soldiers are taught that they have a duty to refuse illegal orders, but this guidance does not circulate during peacetime to senior military lawyers unless leadership anticipates receiving orders that might be illegal. The memo was not sent to junior officers. It was sent to flag officers and general counsel, the people who would have to decide whether to execute or refuse a presidential directive. Then came the intelligence community. 5 agencies simultaneously declined to provide the White House with access to sensitive compartmented information, SCI. The reason cited was concerns about appropriate handling. Let me translate that bureaucratic language for you. They do not trust the president with classified intelligence. When the CIA, NSA, DIA, and 2 other agencies independently decide to withhold information from the commander-in-chief, you are not watching a political disagreement. You are watching the national security apparatus conclude that normal information sharing is an existential threat to the state. The permanent government is protecting itself from the elected government. And this brings us to how Senate Republicans made their calculation. The meeting in Mitch McConnell's office Wednesday morning included 6 people, not 4. McConnell himself, who possesses 38 years of Senate institutional memory. John Thune, the minority whip, whose job is counting votes and knowing exactly where every senator stands. John Barrasso, the conference chair, who manages party messaging. John Cornyn from Texas, facing re-election in 2026 in a state that is trending purple. Mike Rounds from South Dakota, who sits on Armed Services, and Susan Collins from Maine, who serves on the Intelligence Committee. Before this meeting happened, something else occurred Tuesday night that changed the entire calculus. The Senate Legal Counsel briefed Republican leadership on a topic that has never come up in modern Senate history: criminal liability for members who enable unconstitutional acts. The specific statute cited was Title 18, United States Code, Section 2384, seditious conspiracy. Now, this law is typically used against militia groups and domestic terrorists, but the legal counsel walked through a scenario. If senators vote to expand emergency powers, and those powers are subsequently used to suspend elections or deploy the military against civilians, and senators had reason to know those actions were being contemplated, they could face personal criminal liability, not political consequences, not losing elections, criminal prosecution. Senate lawyers told Republican leadership that voting with Trump on emergency powers could make them personally, legally culpable for whatever Trump does with those powers. This is not about primaries anymore. This is not about campaign donations. This is about senators calculating whether defending the president could land them in federal prison, and that calculation changes everything. McConnell opened the meeting by laying out 3 risk categories: political risk, electoral risk, and legal risk. Political risk, he said, we have managed for 8 years. Primaries, angry voters, attacks from the populist right, we know how to survive that. Electoral risk is higher now. Polling shows the association with chaos costs the party 6 to 8 points in swing states, but they have survived bad cycles before. Legal risk is different. Legal risk is permanent. Legal risk does not care about your seniority or your war chest or your name recognition. Once you are indicted, your career is over, regardless of conviction. John Cornyn added the Texas numbers. He is polling 4 points behind his Democratic challenger. Every single point of that deficit tracks to Trump-adjacent chaos. His internal focus groups show that Texas voters, Republican voters, do not want to defend threats to the constitutional order. They do not want to explain emergency power grabs. They want stability. They want governance. They want their senator focused on border security and the economy, not constitutional crises. Susan Collins spoke next. She had attended a classified Intelligence Committee briefing Monday afternoon. She could not share details, but she could share her conclusion. The threats we are monitoring are not just external. When a sitting Intelligence Committee member says that out loud, everyone in the room understands what it means. The domestic threat assessment has elevated. McConnell then proposed the letter, not a press release, not a floor speech, a formal, written communication to the White House stating 3 positions. The Senate will not vote to expand emergency powers without explicit constitutional justification. Senate leadership will not campaign with the president unless foreign policy rhetoric is moderated. If the president primaries sitting Republican senators, the National Republican Senatorial Committee will support incumbents with the full resources of the party. He looked at each person. I need to know right now if you are with me on this. Thune said yes immediately. Cornyn said yes. Rounds said yes. Collins said yes. Barrasso sat in silence for what one source described as the longest 30 seconds of the meeting. Then he said yes. The letter would go forward. But signing a letter is symbolic. Here is what they actually did. Thursday morning, 8 Gauss a.m. Senate Resolution 47 was filed. The official title is Resolution to Affirm Senate Authority over Emergency Declarations. Now, most Senate resolutions are ceremonial. They name post offices. They honor sports teams. They express non-binding opinions. This resolution is different. The operative language states, notwithstanding any declaration by the executive, the Senate retains plenary authority to nullify emergency powers by simple majority vote, effective immediately upon passage. That phrase, notwithstanding any declaration by the executive, is constitutional dynamite. It means the president's opinion is irrelevant. His objections carry no weight. His veto cannot touch this. Here is what this resolution actually does. First, it creates a fast-track process to overturn any emergency declaration. No committee hearings, no extended debate, no procedural delays. A simple majority vote and the emergency is void. Second, it requires only 51 votes, not 67. This is not a treaty. This is not a veto override. This is the Senate exercising internal rulemaking authority that the Constitution grants exclusively to the legislative branch. Third, it takes effect immediately, not after presidential signature, not after judicial review. The moment the Senate votes yes, the resolution is law. The constitutional basis for this is found in Article 1, Section 5. Each House may determine the rules of its proceedings. This clause gives the Senate absolute authority over its own procedures. The President has no say. The courts have no say. The Senate is constitutionally self-governing on internal rules. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed this principle. In United States v. Boleyn, 1892, the court held that each House of Congress has plenary power to establish its own rules. In Nixon v. United States, 1993, the court ruled that Senate procedural votes are political questions beyond judicial review. The precedent is clear. The Senate can pass this resolution, and no other branch can stop them. Now let me show you the vote count. 17 Republicans have committed to supporting the resolution. All 51 Democrats, including the 2 independents who caucus with them, are on board. That gives you 68 votes. You only need 51. This is not a close call. This is not a squeaker. This is a supermajority coalition that makes the outcome certain. And here is what makes this genuinely unprecedented. Trump can rage on social media. He can threaten primaries. He can call them traitors and rhinos and swamp creatures. He can hold rallies and demand loyalty and invoke his base. None of it matters. Constitutionally, legally, procedurally, he has zero power to stop this vote. The Senate just created a mechanism to strip his emergency powers, and there is no legal avenue for him to block it. Executive orders do not apply. Presidential vetoes do not apply. Even if he declared a national emergency to stop the Senate from voting, the Senate would vote anyway and nullify that emergency under the very resolution they are passing. The constitutional architecture gives him no move, and this is where it gets genuinely dangerous. When authoritarians are cornered, they do not surrender quietly. History shows us consistent patterns. Richard Nixon faced certain impeachment in 1974. He resigned, but only after the Saturday Night Massacre, after firing the Attorney General, after attempting to shut down the special prosecutor investigation. He escalated before he capitulated. Boris Yeltsin in Russia, 1993. He faced a parliament trying to limit his power. He shelled his own legislature with tanks. Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, 2016, faced a military coup attempt. He purged 15,000 officers, arrested 50,000 people, and consolidated authoritarian control. The pattern is consistent. Resistance triggers escalation. So here are the 4 pathways from this moment with honest probability assessments. Scenario A, capitulation. Trump backs down. He moderates the rhetoric. He claims he forced the Senate to do its job and respect constitutional limits. He declares victory and moves on. Probability 15%. This scenario requires Trump to accept a form of defeat gracefully, which is inconsistent with every behavioral pattern he has demonstrated over 5 decades in public life. Scenario B, legal guerrilla warfare. Trump challenges the Senate resolution in federal court. He argues the Senate exceeded its constitutional authority. He instructs executive agencies to ignore the resolution. He declares the Senate action illegitimate. He creates a competing legal framework where his emergency powers remain valid. This creates constitutional chaos. 2 branches claiming conflicting legal authority, no clear answer about who is actually in charge. Probability 60%. This is Trump's historical pattern. Create legal ambiguity, find one sympathetic judge, get an injunction, appeal to the Supreme Court, drag out the process, delegitimize institutions while claiming to defend the Constitution. Scenario C, extra legal action. Trump declares a national emergency under separate statutory authority. He invokes the Insurrection Act to deploy military forces domestically. He argues the Senate is staging a legislative coup and he must restore order. The Senate is forced to choose between immediate impeachment or acquiescence. Probability 25%. This is the nightmare scenario, and it is not impossible. Scenario D, the 25th Amendment. The cabinet invokes the 25th Amendment, declares Trump unable to discharge presidential duties, and removes him from power temporarily. Trump contests the removal, and it goes to Congress, requiring 2/3 of both houses to make it permanent. Probability extremely low. The threshold is extraordinarily high, and the political will for this specific mechanic is likely not there unless actual violence breaks out. The most likely outcome is path 2, leading to path 1. Trump challenges in court, loses after a brief legal battle, Senate authority is affirmed, and emergency powers are curtailed. But the institutional damage is permanent. Let me bring this full circle. We have a legal memo drafted in secrecy and pulled within minutes. We have bureaucrats across the government refusing to follow normal procedures. We have Senate Republicans breaking with their own president on matters of executive authority. We have international allies preparing contingency plans for American governmental collapse. We have markets pricing in institutional instability. All of this is converging in a 48-hour window. This is not about Trump alone. This is about whether constitutional democracy has functional antibodies against authoritarian impulses. It is about whether institutions designed 237 years ago can constrain concentrated power in the modern era. It is about whether fear-based political control can be broken through collective institutional action. What is at stake is the precedent. If the Senate successfully curtails emergency authority, future presidents operate within boundaries. If Trump breaks through these constitutional limits, future presidents inherit a presidency with no effective constraints. The rule of law versus the rule of individuals. Constitutional order versus personal power. Democratic norms versus authoritarian instability. While the domestic crisis unfolds, the international response is happening in real time. Thursday morning, 3:00 a.m. Brussels time. The NATO Military Committee convened an emergency session. The agenda item was listed as United States Political Stability Assessment. NATO has never, in 75 years, held a formal session to assess the political stability.
पढ़ पढ़ इल्म किताबां सब्बे ते तू नाम रखा लिया काजी फड़ तलवार दिलावर बनियो ते तू नाम रखा लिया गाजी मक्के जाके हज गुजारे ते तू नाम रखा लिया हाजी ओ बुल्ले शाह अजे कख नहीं खटिया ओ जे तू यार नी कीता राजी की करना भरोसा झूठे यार दा की करना भरोसा झूठे यार दा मैनू दगा दिता पहला फिर पुकार दा की करना यारां दे झूठे प्यार दा की करना यारां दे झूठे प्यार दा जे मैं कल्ला कल्ला बैठे रात गुजारदा की करना यारां दे झूठे प्यार दा की करना मर्ज मैनू तेरा होवे ਦਵਾ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੇ ਦਰਦ ਮਿਟ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਜੇ ਤੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਹਾਲ ਵੇ ਓ ਮਰਜ਼ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਤੇਰਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਦਵਾ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੇ ਦਰਦ ਮਿਟ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਜੇ ਤੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਹਾਲ ਵੇ ਇਸ਼ਕ ਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਮਿਰਜ਼ਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇਰਾ ਹੀ ਕਮਾਲ ਵੇ ਫਿਕਰ ਤੇਰੀ ਮਿਰਜ਼ੇ ਨੂੰ ਬਸ ਤੇਰਾ ਹੀ ਖਿਆਲ ਵੇ ਦਗਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਪੁਕਾਰਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਭਰੋਸਾ ਝੂਠ ਯਾਰ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਭਰੋਸਾ ਝੂਠ ਯਾਰ ਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦਗਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਪੁਕਾਰਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ